I'm thinking that after today's lesson, I don't know if mad is the right word, but you'd be like, why didn't you just show me this first? And then we wouldn't have had to do all that factoring stuff. But it's really important to know how to factor for later on for what you're doing in math, in algebra 2, and even sometimes in geometry. So it wasn't pointless, but you're going to find out that there is a quicker way, or sometimes it's quicker, not always. Not always. Sometimes a quadratic equation doesn't give us a quicker response. But let's go and look at. Let's look at a problem that we already know how to solve. X squared minus 2x minus 24 equals 0. Up until now, how could we solve this problem? How could we solve this? Ben, what's one way we could solve this?
We could factor.
We could factor. Simply, we could factor. What's another way we could solve this equation? We could solve this quadratic function. How could we figure out? Yes, ma'am. Good. Good, Samantha. We can graph it. We can graph it, and we can find out where it crosses the x-axis. Why would sometimes graphing not be our best bet? Sam?
Doesn't give us an exact point.
Sometimes it doesn't give us an exact point. You want to add on to that?
That equation says does x equal -4.
Does x equal -4? Well, we can take a look at it. Okay, we can take a look at it. How could we factor this? What should we do?
Well, I know.
Okay.
Use that thing where it's like x minus 4 and x minus 6. It's like a
So we're multiplying to, what are we multiplying to and adding to here? So what are we multiplying to? Lucas, what are we multiplying to? -24. What are we adding to, Olivia?
2. -2.
-2. So what multiplies to -24 and adds to -2, Andy? -6. -6 and +4. Okay? And since the leading coefficient is 1, we don't even have to split the middle term. We just know that x minus 6 times x plus 4 equals 0. Okay, so, and to answer your question, does x equal -4? That is correct. Okay, but it also equals +6. Because if we set this equal to 0 and we set this equal to 0, either one of these two binomials equals 0, we know that the equation is going to equal 0. Okay? So our answer in this case, if we factor this, we would get 6 and -4. Well, that's nothing new. Okay? Today, you're going to be able to say that I can solve the equation, the quadratic equation, using 3 different ways. You already know how to do 2 of them. I want to add the third one for you. The third way is I can solve an equation by using the quadratic formula. So what are you going to need to know if you can solve the equation with the quadratic formula? Yes, Braden, we need to know the quadratic formula. Well, part of the quadratic formula you kind of already know. Okay, so if we take it, and for those who are note takers, and you learn best through notes, and you want to be able to refer back to this, you're going to write down x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. What looks familiar to you so far in this quadratic equation? Yes.
The minus b over 2a.
Exactly. What does that give us? What's that in the equation? That's our axis of symmetry. Exactly. That gives us the axis of symmetry. So it's working with that parabola. Okay, this equation works with that, and we'll later on we'll see why this works. But for right now, yes, that's the axis of symmetry. Part of it's built into the quadratic formula. Okay, do we know what B, A, and C? Do we know what A, B, and C are in a quadratic equation?
Yes.
Yes, we've learned this over and over and over. So if we look at x squared minus 2x minus 24, okay? What is A, what is B, what is C? What's A, Brendan?
X squared.
No. It's not x squared. We've got to get this down. It's at the point where we have to have this. What is A? Brendan. It's not x squared. No. The number, Brendan.
What?
1. A is 1. There we go. Okay? Remember, it's not the x. Got it? It's not the x squared. It's the number that's associated. It's in the position of x squared. Okay? I know you're on the right track, but you got to know the number that it is associated with. Okay? What's B then, Jess? Or do you have a question, Jess?
No.
Can you tell me what B is?
-2.
Good. B equals -2, and C here. -24. Okay. So now that we have that, it's just plug and chug. All it is plug and chug. And for the most part, you're going to want to use your calculator. But let's go through this and let's see how we solve it. So we've got -2 plus or minus b squared, in this case. You'll see in just a second. Plus or negative. It means you have two answers. Or you're going to do it twice. You're not necessarily going to have two answers, but you're going to do it twice. Okay?
And minus.
-4 times A times C. All over 2 times A. Yes, sir.
That should be -24 right next to 1.
Thank you. I don't know why I put -2. Maybe because that's what B is, and I need to write down. Okay. So we've got -2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is -2, minus 4 times 1 times -24 over 2 times 1. And then you just do the math. What do we do first? What are we going to do first? Guys, come on. Do I have to go back to September? And go all the way back to 5th grade and learn? I mean, this is order of operations. What do I do first? Parentheses. We could do what's in parentheses. That's fine. Yes. Parentheses. And here's something that you may not know. Okay? Parentheses. Parentheses, obvious, but sometimes we treat a fraction bar like a parentheses. So we have to do everything on top and everything on bottom before we do our last division. Okay? We also treat the square root like a parentheses. Okay, you want to do what's underneath the square root before you do anything else. So maybe that's a little new to you, but anyway, let's go ahead and work this part out. I'm sorry, I put the equal sign. That's actually 2. Okay? X equals, I'm going to write this out over here. X equals 2 plus or minus, and then we have to do the math underneath here. We know 2 times 1 is just 2, so I can write that down. We have to do the math under here. So we've got the square root of, what's -2 squared?
4.
Yes, thank you. 4 minus 4 times 1 times -24. I got that in my head, but Brendan, what's that?
86.
Close. I think of it like 96, yeah, because 4 times 25 would be 100, and that's 1 less 4 times, so it'd be 96. But anyways, and that's positive 96. Okay? So now I've got x, if I add those together, I've got x equals 2 plus or minus 100 over 2. So now this is where we break it into 2. So to answer your question, Cole, what does that plus or minus mean? Well, we're going to do 2 plus the square root of 100, and we're going to do 2 minus the square root of 100. So I break it up. Once I get this into a manageable number, I'm going to break it up into 2 problems. I'm going to have x equals 2 plus the square root of 100 divided by 2, and then I've got x equals 2 negative the square root of 100 divided by 2. Does that make sense? Okay. So what is the square root of 100? Yes, sir. 10 times 10, right? So we've got 2 plus 10 divided by 2. And 2 plus 10 is 12 divided by 2. X equals 6. That was our previous answer. And then I've got x equals 2 minus 10, because the square root of 100 is still 10, so divided by 2. So that's 2 minus 10 is negative 8. Divided by 2 is negative 4. Yes, sir. You could just factor. Okay? You say, well, factoring is just easier. Well, later on, it's not going to be easier. Not with all of them. Because some of them you can't factor with whole numbers. And that's where it gets hard. And we're going to see one like that in just a second, where it's an irrational number. An irrational number, you could never just factor it. It just, you can't factor it. It's an irrational number. So you can't find 2 numbers that multiply to one number and add to another. You get close, but you can't. You know how we've done those before? We couldn't find 2 numbers. Okay, that's because they were prime. That doesn't mean you can't solve them, but it just means they're prime.
Wait, so we only have to use this if we can't factor?
Unless I say use the quadratic formula, solve by using the quadratic formula, I would expect to see all these steps.
Okay, well, we have to memorize that formula.
What's that?
We have to memorize
Yes, you have to have that formula memorized. You're going to use it so many times that it'll be easy to
How
remember.
did you get it?
Okay.
How did you get it? So we're getting it.
So let's go ahead and let's look at. I'm going to have you go ahead and solve a problem.
How'd you get negative 4?
What's that?
How'd you get negative 4?
How did I get negative 4? Right here, 2 minus 10 is negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Got it? Okay, so I want you to practice with this for a second. I want you to solve the equation x squared minus 2x minus 35 equals 0. Okay, I want you to solve this using the quadratic equation, or the quadratic formula. You already, oh, so you're one of those who really did need to write it down, but you didn't write it down when I suggested. So, this time, you're going to write down the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So you're going to solve this 2 ways. One by factoring. This is an easy one. One by factoring, and then I want you to use the quadratic formula. Okay? I want to show the steps, going step by step, using the quadratic formula. Okay? Go ahead. let's solve this. Let's go ahead and first, let's factor, okay? This is an easy one to factor. What are we multiplying to? Factor. I'm gonna pull in my students who just walked in. What if we're going to factor the equation x squared minus 2x minus 35? What are we multiplying to and what are we adding to? Allie, what are we multiplying to here?
Oh, it's that.
Negative 35. Excellent. So this isn't anything new, Allie. The next part will be, so you'll pay attention to that. What are we adding to here, Sarah?
-2.
Negative 2. So we're multiplying to negative 35 and adding to negative 2. What multiplies to negative 35 and adds to negative 2? Austin.
It'd be -7 and 5.
Negative 7 and 5. That means x minus 7 times x plus 5. And you're absolutely right. That equals 0. And when we set those equal to 0, we know that x would equal 7 and x would equal negative 5. Okay? So when we do the quadratic equation, that's what this is going to equal. Now, remember, we need to know what A, B, and C is. Brendan, what's A? 1. Yes! Yes. A equals 1 here. What's B equal? What's B in my equation? Olivia? -2. And what does C equal, Lupe?
-35.
Good. -35. Now, it is simply plug and chug. Plug and chug. And this plus or minus means that we might have 2 answers. How many answers could we have? We could have 2 answers. We already know that. We could have 1 answer and we could have 0 answers. Remember, when we are graphing quadratic equations, just like the extra credit problem said on your quiz, you can have 0 roots, you could have 1 root, or you could have 2 roots. Any of those are possibilities with our quadratic equation or quadratic formula as well. This one, we know that there are going to be 2 answers when we plug and chug here. That's where that plus or minus comes from. Okay? So let's just plug and chug. So B is -2. So we've got x equals -2. Plus or minus B squared, which is -2 squared minus 4 times 1 times -35. All over 2 times 1, which is A. Alright? So now we know that we have to do the parentheses here. Okay? We know that we're going to do this, this, and this first. Okay, those 3 things we're going to do. It doesn't matter which order, as long as you don't do the plus or minus or the division. You do all that first in our equation. Okay, so in this case, I've got -2. -2 is 2. Plus or minus the square root. And before I take the square root, I have to do the math under here. Okay, -2 squared is 4, +4, minus 4 times 1 is 4. What's 4 times 35? Is that 140? Done? Done there? Okay. Second. Okay. And that's positive 140. Because we've got a negative times a negative there is a positive. So it's positive 140. And then 2 times 1 here is just 2. So we know the square, we can automatically add that together. No, it's not. We've got 140 and 4 is 144. We know 144 is what? 144 is 12.
No, it's not.
I know. 144 is a perfect square, right? Perfect square. So you're jumping a step ahead. I know where you're at, but so we know 144 is a perfect square, and that makes this a little easier. And this is the point where I'm going to split it into two problems. So Allie and Sarah, I want you to pay attention closely here, because this is x equals 2 plus 12, 2 plus the square root of 144 divided by 2, and x equals 2 minus, and that's where we're just splitting it into two problems here, 2 minus 12 divided by 2. So 2 plus 12 is 14 over 2, which is 7, so x equals 7. And then 2 minus 12 is negative 10 divided by 2, x equals negative 5. Do you have any questions about that one? Okay. Allie, did that make sense? I know you guys kind of came in the middle of the lesson, but that's where that is. Yes?
Scroll back up real quick.
Absolutely.
So is that why you did the what it adds to and multiplies to up there, so you know what your answer bracket is?
Yeah, what I was trying to exemplify is that when we, at the beginning of this lesson, I asked them, how can we solve a quadratic equation? And we determined we can solve it by graphing, we can solve it by factoring, and I said, I'm going to teach you a third way, and that you should be able to say at the end of the lesson today that I can solve a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. And that's what this is this right here is our quadratic formula. Not all problems we can factor, right? And that's where the quadratic formula comes in handy. And sometimes graphing, when we graph, it doesn't hit the x-axis perfect. We've seen, remember I think it was number 3 on our quiz. It didn't hit exactly, and we had to get about what it equaled. And some of you use your calculator to find the square root of 5. Well, the quadratic equation is going to give us that a little bit easier than trying to figure out exactly what it is. Okay? And we're going to look at one right here where it's not necessarily easy to solve. So we've got 24x squared. 24x squared minus 14x equals 6. What's the first thing I need to do in a problem like this? First thing I need to do. Allie?
Minus 6 from one side.
Okay. Is that what you were going to say, Cole?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to subtract 6 from each side. So we're going to have 24x squared minus 14x minus 6 equals 0. Okay. So right offhand, if I was going to multiply to a number and add to a number, what would I be multiplying to, Jared?
What'd you say?
If I was going to solve this by factoring, what would I do? Lucas, what would I do?
24 and negative 6.
24 and negative 6. What does that equal? Anyone have that? 20 times 6, 4 times 6. Yeah. Negative 144. Okay, and then we'd have to add to negative 14. Yeah.
Can't we just factor out 2?
You could, that's true, we could factor out a 2 to begin with. That's probably a better place to start. So now what are we multiplying to? Negative 36 and adding to negative 7. Is there anything that multiplies to negative 36 and adds to negative 7? Give you a moment to figure that out. Lucas? know? Think you have something there like, oh, nope, not that one. Jasmine? You don't have anything?
It's not.
Yeah, and actually, you're not going to be able to come up with a number that multiplies to negative 36 and adds to negative 7. Does that mean we have no answer? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the quadratic equation. How much time do we have? Oh, we got just enough time. So x equals, again, what's the quadratic equation? Jared. Oh, he's going to his notes.
X equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a.
Okay, get to work, plug and chug.
Oh, you have to.
You got it. Okay, so this is where we're going to leave off tonight. You'll notice that we've already done, you should have already had tonight's homework that's in classroom finished. If you want to work ahead, you can. We're going to come, if you want to start some of the problems in 10.4, that is fine. But we will come back to this problem first thing tomorrow. Okay, this is where we're going to begin the lesson. So, have a good day.